moving on to the next session. It's not unusual for talented people to span several disciplines, as we've seen over the last few days. Artist to entrepreneur, scientist to conservationist, but a musician to a national security advisor. This kind of feels a bit weird, and it must mean there's a very special person behind it. Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers remain icons in US music history, with some of the most inventive and enduring guitar riffs of all time, enduring in the back of our minds for years after, and then re-emerging years later on popular radio shows, reminding us of our youth and the time when we were at our most carefree and creative. Jeffrey Baxter, as we will see and hear, retains that fine musicianship today while introducing us to the creative and unconventional problem-solving approach that he's made his own. So as he casually strides back from lunch at the Pentagon with 4-star generals, I just wonder what he's thinking. Before he tells us himself, we'd like to have a DVD. So retain your applause now, and we'll go into a DVD, and I'll introduce him in a minute.
Now to the story of a rock star who's helping the Pentagon with top-secret military defense projects. No joke. Guitarist Jeff Baxter, if you know your rock history, he was a founding member of Steely Dan, who later became one of the Doobie Brothers, and who is now, believe it or not, one of the country's top counterterrorism experts. Our national correspondent, Jamie Gangel, caught up with Baxter in between top-secret meetings. Jamie, this sounds intense.
Hey, Matt, you can't make this up. 56-year-old Jeff Baxter has 8 platinum albums and 2 Grammys, but he likes to call himself a hippie rock guitarist with top-secret clearances. One of rock and roll's top guitarists, Jeff Baxter is best known for his years with Steely Dan and then the Doobie Brothers. He looked the part, lived the part, and even had a rocker nickname.
Oh, some people call me Skunk.
But it turns out Skunk was also interested in something other than music. If someone had told you when you were making all those hit songs that someday you would end up a defense expert with every clearance in the world, you would have said?
I would have said, you're out of your mind.
It began in the mid-'80s when Baxter, researching music technology, started reading about weapon systems, became a self-taught expert, and for the fun of it, wrote a 5-page paper on missile defense.
So one day, I don't know what happened, I sat down in my Tandy 200 and wrote this paper about how to convert the Aegis weapon system, why it would make sense to convert it to do theater missile defense, because it would be on a mobile platform, give the United States a new role in NATO in the 21st century. I have no idea. I just did it.
It turned out the defense industry and Congress were impressed.
Hey, Skunkster.
Hey, Dana.
These 2 conservative congressmen are Baxter's biggest fans.
I want you to tell me that we're not getting BS'd about missile defense and that it's actually going to have an impact here.
It's a hard thing to do.
And both men say they appreciate Baxter's outsider status.
Skunk didn't grow up in the system. He hasn't been beaten down by the system. His very freedom of thought and his just a gut-level understanding of technology contributes greatly, and people know that.
Are people skeptical when you say you're bringing him in or introducing him to someone?
Yeah, I think out here a lot of eyebrows are raised. I think we've got a little bit of a hurdle at times, but after he discusses policy, we turn people around pretty quick.
And apparently, no one much minds the ponytail or handlebar mustache. At the moment, Baxter chairs the Congressional Advisory Board on Missile Defense and is a highly paid consultant for the likes of Northrop Grumman and General Atomics, to name a few. As you got further and further involved in this, weren't you ever thinking, wait a minute, I'm a musician, I'm a rock star?
Interestingly enough, most of the people grew up listening to my music, and the lieutenant commanders and majors, who are now 3- and 4-star generals and admirals, could sort of relate. You can talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk.
Do you ever have a credibility problem?
It's been extremely rare. I guess the credibility part was really hard amongst my friends in the music business, because prior to 9/11, many of them just thought I was nuts. After 9/11, that all changed.
And Baxter certainly has no credibility problem here at the Missile Defense Agency.
Good morning, General.
Morning.
How you doing?
Good, good,
The
good.
boss
Pleased
is
to-
three-star General Henry Obering.
Any tasking for me for the rest of the time I'm here?
Well,
What
as
does
you
Jeff
know,
bring to the
Jeff,
table that other defense experts don't?
In a word, out of the box thinking, meaning that he comes at problems and he comes at challenges that we may face with a very different perspective.
Is there an example you can give me that's not classified?
Very few, very few. But when we were looking at how we could build some of the building blocks of the missile defense system, he brought some very innovative ideas, I'll say it that way.
Despite that contribution, Baxter has not given up his music career. Between meetings, he's back home in California recording a new album. But at the end of the day, while he still loves to play, Baxter says defense work has given him a new kind of satisfaction.
Do you miss being a full-time rock star?
No, because to me, life is a series of adventures, chapters, and I have a wall full of gold records and platinum records and awards, and I'm very proud of it. But I learned what it meant to have someone say, we need you in room 125A, and you walk in, and there's just two guys there, and they shake your hand and say, thank you very much, you did a good job. I love what I'm doing, and I feel privileged enough to work and be in the fight. So to me, I'm the luckiest man alive.
And if you ask him to play a song these days, this is his favorite.
Matt, this was always sort of a hobby for him. He says 9/11 made it a calling. Matt?
All right, I'm going to ask this, Jamie, and stop me if this takes us down a path we don't want to go on. How did he get the nickname Skunk?
He refuses to say, but you can use your imagination. Leave it at that.
I should have left it at that. Jamie, thanks very much.
Sure.
Up next, we're going to reveal...
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Baxter.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. That makes it a lot easier. People ask me all the time how I got to be where I am, and it's always difficult to discuss. Okay, couple of things. I'm going to try to leave some time for question and answer. I had my nervous system surgically removed after the second Steely Dan album, so you can ask me anything you want. Doesn't scare me at all. Feel free. Keep the vegetables to a minimum. The only thing is I can't answer, obviously, any questions about anything that's classified, and I'm not going to answer any questions about Barbra Streisand. So everything else is on the table. Okay, what I'd like to do is talk about problem solving and innovation, because they're not only a theme of this conference, but something that I've been involved in for a long time. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about a couple of my experiences, and then talk a little bit about what I learned from those experiences and how I've been able to apply that in the real world. So after I wrote that paper, next thing I knew, I was in Washington, D.C., and next thing I knew, I was at the Pentagon, and I was working doing missile defense. And General Lester Lyles, who was the head of the Missile Defense Agency at the time, said, I have a little favor I want you to do for me. This is going to be I'm explaining this because this is an exercise in creative thinking on the part of General Lyles. He said, I want you to go to Boeing and Lockheed, which are two of the largest defense contractors in the world, and I want you to do an assessment of their missile defense program. Now, this is a $13 billion program. So imagine, if you will, you're the president of Lockheed, and you get a phone call from a three-star general. It says, this is General Lester Lyles here. I'm sending someone out to look at your defense program. He's got all the clearances he needs, and his opinion is going to weigh very heavily on whether or not we go with you with a $13 billion program. And by the way, he's a guitar player for the Doobie Brothers. Hangs up the phone. All right, so you're going, what? Same thing with Boeing. Now, these guys are now friends, but imagine at the time. So I kind of had an idea what he wanted me to do. So I washed my hair about 18 times, put on a Grateful Dead t-shirt, and walked into Lockheed, And they were going to give me a presentation. And so I said, oh, space, man, far out, man. I know a lot about space, man. I spent a lot of time there, you know what I mean? And they're scratching their heads, so they're very kindly, the gentleman goes up and he says, well, here's how missile defense works. Mr. Missile comes out and it goes up into the atmosphere, and then Mr. Interceptor takes off here and they hit, and that's how it works. And we went, far out, man. Far out. Except I have one question. At a high delta V, in the exoatmospheric interception, using an S-band radar, how do you guarantee a high PK in a threat cloud? And the guy goes, we'll be right back with a different presentation for you. Anyway, the object of this exercise was very simple. General Lyles knew that these people eat lieutenant colonels for breakfast and chew up congressional staffers for lunch. But they didn't know what to do with a hippie. They didn't know what a guy who was a guitar player was, the guitar player of the Doobie Brothers. They didn't know what to do with him. I'm not saying that they would lie to me because that's not true. But on the other hand, they had to tell me the truth because they didn't know what I didn't know. They didn't know what I didn't know. So one other quick example, wargaming. And I do a lot of wargaming, and I also teach the business community about wargaming, which is an interesting thing. We'll get into that in a moment. Very quickly, I can tell you the unclassified part of this game. Myself and a 3-star admiral were tasked to do a war game. Iran and Iraq were allies, Persian Gulf. There was going to be a big fight. And we were on the red team. The red team are the bad guys. Blue team is the good guys. The white team are the folks that run the game. So Admiral Sonny Masso tells me, okay, Skunk, you're going to be the Ayatollah of rock and roll. I went, great, okay, whatever that means. So we're going to now fight this fight. To make a long story short, how do you fight a superior force? Well, you look for an Achilles heel. You look for something that gives you an advantage. You study the problem and you look around. Anyway, make a long story short, first thing I did is I hacked into the naval personnel files and made everybody's wife sent to all their wives photographs of their husbands that looked like they've been horribly disfigured with chemical and biological weapons. Well, I'm standing inside the command cell. The door bursts open. A large Marine colonel kicks the door open, grabs me in the headlock, and starts beating the crap out of me. He was angry. Well, okay, fair enough. What we did was horrible. As a matter of fact, they threw him out of the game. Not because he beat the crap out of me. I could have pressed charges, but that's what the hell. It's a war game, right? So they dragged him out of the game because the command said, you are no longer capable of making a rational decision. You are out of the game. Bingo, we win, point one. Little old us. Next thing we did is we said, okay, we're going to try something really interesting. We're going to introduce petroleum-eating bacteria into the Saudi oil supply, so by the time it gets to Japan, it's turned into chocolate pudding. See what happens then. Next thing you know, over the speaker system says, Blue Force will pull out of the Persian Gulf at 0800 tomorrow morning. Because what we did, we didn't shoot anybody, we didn't attack anybody. All we did was find the Achilles heel, because the Japanese said, if you don't do that, we're going to pull all our money out of U.S. treasuries. So bingo, we won the game. Now, yeah, we serviced a submarine and shot a couple things. It's a war game, you have to do that. But here, the point of this is, if you study a problem and you study it from enough different perspectives, you will find solutions and abilities and advantages that you never thought were there. Well, how do you get this kind of thinking? Well, I listening to Bill yesterday, who was an incredible guy, one of the things that he was talking about, and that I'm going to talk about, is innovation and creativity. Well, a lot of times innovation and creativity comes from conflict. Now, I don't know if anybody here has been in the armed forces, but there were two great writers. Has anybody ever read a book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu? Anybody ever heard of that? Ah, good, okay. Basically, It was written 2,500 years ago and is an incredible treatise on war. But more importantly, it's not so much about war, it's about conflict. It's about conflict between individuals, conflict between groups of human beings. And von Clausewitz, and I would tell you not to read this book because it's 600 pages long, but basically what he says is war and diplomacy are the same thing. They are just different states, like water, ice, and steam. They're all water, they're just different states in a constantly moving change of state. So how do you describe conflict? Well, anybody in this audience ever been divorced? I mean, you don't have to raise your hands because I'm, just. Well, let's see. What is that? When you marry someone, you sign a treaty, right? That you will agree to a certain set of terms, and as long as both parties agree to those terms, you stay on the diplomatic side. As soon as something starts to go a little south, all of a sudden it goes into conflict. And then, of course, I don't know how it works here, but in the United States, each side hires batteries of lawyers, which take all your money. They buy a new Mercedes-Benz or a new BMW, and you don't get anything other than this huge mess. And then once it's all over, and the fight is finished, and everybody finally signs another treaty, it goes back from conflict into the diplomatic side of things. Now, why is that important? Because many times, and I hate to say this because I am not a fan of war. If I could wave a magic wand, I'm a hippie rock guitar player. If I could just go like this and eliminate war, I would be happy as a clam. The problem is that I don't know, at least in the foreseeable future, if I can do that. One of the interesting things that does come out of war, though, is innovation. Radar. You look at so many things that have come out of conflict, and it's been actually kind of productive. I think the human race, and I had some wonderful conversations with some folks just before I got on here, the human race needs to sit back and have a hard look at itself and say maybe the way we're going about this innovative process might be a little stupid. Maybe we ought to look at this from a different point of view. And I absolutely agree with you. And again, I wish I had maybe I'll use that as a magic wand. We try. But so what is it about creativity and innovation? How do you make that happen? Well, there's a really wonderful man named John Boyd, Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd. And I don't normally tell people to read anything, but if you ever want to read a book that will really, really interest you, it's the biography of John Boyd. John Boyd was Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Air Force. Now, I don't know if you know anything about fighter pilots, but fighter pilots think they are the coolest guys on the planet. They are cooler than Bon Jovi. They are cooler than anybody because they fly fast jets and they do cool things, they think. So Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd said, you guys are a bunch of maroons. You guys are a bunch of morons. You're stupid. You don't know anything. Air combat is just a series of energy management algorithms, and I'll take on anybody. And they called him 60-Second Boyd. He said, you can stay on my tail for 60 seconds, I'll pay you $1,000. Never happened. Now, John Boyd was an interesting fellow. He came from a broken family, poverty, he self-educated on a lot of levels, was finally allowed to go to school because he was helped with a scholarship. And this is a guy who came up with some very interesting ideas. Has anyone ever heard of the OODA loop? O-O-D-A. Observe, orient, decide, and act. The idea is that there is a small, very simple, but very effective formula for problem solving. And think about, right now when you're in the audience, think about a problem, any problem that you've had, whether it's fixing a doorstop to getting your son to do his homework. And look, and then apply that algorithm to that problem, and you will be amazed how that works. And by the way, it's not just linear. It's not just going from O to O to D to A. You can go from observe to orient to decide, and then go from decide to orient. In other words, it works in a fluid feedback fashion. Now, John Boyd, like I say, the Air Force did not like him very much. And when he died, and when he passed away, the Air Force sent a major to Arlington Cemetery to sit there and stand at his grave on a rainy day for about an hour. The U.S. Marine Corps sent a full bird colonel and 4 lieutenants, and they stood there at attention for 4 hours in the rain because I don't know if you know much about the United States Marine Corps, but they don't get anything. Everybody else gets all the good stuff. The U.S. Marine Corps gets nothing. So the U.S. Marines have a wonderful saying: the difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer. Well, why do they have that? Because they make up in problem solving what they lack in equipment and capabilities. So John Boyd came up with a very interesting idea, and this is where it's going to tie in. I'm going to step back for a moment. I was reading in a publication that we have in government about a gentleman in one of our agencies who said, you know what, I'll bet you that we need to completely reorganize our way of doing analysis. And I think that if we could teach people to improvise, we could be successful at it, because musicians do it. Well, I went crazy. I picked up the phone, called this guy, and I said, we got to have lunch. So we sat down and we had lunch and we talked about it. And interestingly enough, John Boyd wrote something about analysis and synthesis, destruction and reconstruction, analysis and synthesis. Now, it's not just analysis, it's analyzing something. In other words, you all probably know, smarter than me, to analyze a problem, the best way to do it, at least in the beginning, is to break it down into its smallest pieces. A problem usually is very difficult to solve when it's this big 800-pound gorilla, but if you can break it down into Vienna hot dog-sized hors d'oeuvres, you can solve this problem or go a long way to it. But what Boyd figured out is it's not just the analysis part, because then you have to synthesize, which means you take all of those pieces that you have broken down and reorganize them in such a way that allows you to see the problem from a different perspective and may give you an answer. Well, that's what musicians do every day. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I studied classical piano for 11 years. I still fall asleep at night listening to Beethoven's Sixth Symphony or Barber's Adagio. I love classical music. As a matter of fact, does anybody know who Keith Emerson is from Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Keith and I are going to go do a concert. It's going to be called A Night with Pachelbel. Anybody heard Pachelbel's Canon, the song? I'll play it in a second. You've heard it at every wedding you've gone to. It's kind of boring. But interestingly enough, this song, the chord changes from this song are the same chord changes as every great R&B ballad that was ever written. The Everly Brothers, Let It Be Me, Sam and Dave. Every great ballad has the exact same chords. So somebody somewhere did their homework. They analyzed Pachelbel's Canon. They synthesized it into another piece of music. So now I'm reading this thing by John Boyd and I'm saying, okay, now I totally understand where this guy is coming from. He has come up with a universal understanding of problem solving, and problem solving gets you to the next portion, which is innovation. How do you innovate? Now, Bill Strickland again mentioned something, and we're going to talk a little bit about jazz, but he mentioned music. Now, how many musicians are in the audience? And when I say musicians, I mean anybody that can do anything that has to do with music. I don't mean you have to be, super duper. Okay, which is interesting. I don't know what the school system is like in Noreen, but has anybody ever taken a course in nonlinear thinking? You have. 2, 3, 4. Okay. That means everybody else has it. That means that nobody or very few people teach it. It's not taught in American schools. Nobody sits down and teaches you how to think on multi-levels, multi-dimensionally, looking at a problem from a number of different points at the same time. The only way you can do that, learn it, is in two, well, not the only way, but most effective ways are in two ways: athletics and music. Now, I already talked a little bit about musicians and how they solve problems, and we're going to talk about jazz as an analytical piece. But let's talk about sports for a minute. Everybody watch basketball? Everybody knows what basketball is, right? What's a basketball player? What does he do? Well, run around the court and throw the ball, right? Well, okay, let's break it down. What does a basketball player really do? Well, he's a runner. In other words, he has to know how to run, how to be able to sustain himself, moving at a pace faster than a walk. So he's a runner. He's a wrestler. You ever watch the basketball game? That's not just a bunch of guys out there having a great time. They're beating the crap out of each other. So these guys are wrestlers and boxers. What else is a basketball player? He's an artillery officer. Because what he has to do is when he throws that ball, he has to calculate the ballistic coefficients of moving that ball from that spot to getting through that hoop. So he's a number of different things at the same time. He's a tactician because he has to think on his feet in a constantly fluid situation. So all of a sudden we're finding that a basketball player is a number of things. Now, how does anyone do all of that at the same time? That's, as you probably know, is non-linear thinking. The ability to look at a problem from a number of different facets at a number of different levels, in the same way musicians do. When you play music as a musician, as you musicians know, it's not just playing, it's time, tempo, feel, harmony, counterpoint, composition, lyric. It's so many different things all happening at the same time. Well, then there's two pieces to that. One is, has anybody ever looked at an organizational chart for a symphony orchestra? It looks a lot like a government org chart. It's scary. There's the director, the conductor, and then all these little boxes that go to all these other little boxes and all these other little boxes. And it operates kind of like the government, in some ways. Second violinist is sleeping with the first violinist's wife. One of the oboe players really doesn't want to play oboe anyway, wants to play trumpet. Then there's all this interaction going and stuff going on behind the scenes. Now, interestingly enough, who in the symphony orchestra has the final say in the creative outlet, in the creative process? Who's the one person in the symphony orchestra that really is the person that has the final say? The conductor. It's his game. He's up there. He's reinterpreting everything. He may decide to make something a little more rubato. He may decide he changes whatever he wants to change. And whatever these folks do, they got to do what he tells them to do. Now, that doesn't mean they're not experts, but they're not improvising. They are going from a set of rules in a very linear fashion and only being conducted, interpreted, directed by one person. Not a lot of innovation. Now, jazz. Does everybody know how jazz works? It's very simple. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, the concept is you take a theme, and I'm going to show you that in a minute with a Steely Dan song. We're going to take a theme, and then we're going to interpret it in a number of different ways. So you take a theme, and then each person in the jazz quintet analyzes that theme. It is an analytical process. To, again, talk about what Bill was talking about yesterday, Dizzy Gillespie stands up, and he then does his analysis of the theme. He steps back. Charlie Parker comes up, and then he does his analysis of the theme. He steps back. Bud Powell does his analysis, and so on and so forth. Each musician in the quintet, sextet, whatever it may be, is allowed to give, not only allowed to give their interpretation, but with a mutual and tremendous respect by the other members of the band. They not only want him to improvise, they support him in it. And the more he improvises, the more his expertise grows, the more they learn, and at the end of the jazz piece, you then repeat the theme one more time. And in a sense, if any of you are the mathematicians out there, it is an entropic set enclosed with a set of boundaries. There's a tremendous amount of chaos, but it does have a rule set. So at the end of it, you now have done a complete analysis. Well, what does that have to do with problem solving? Well, imagine, if you will, the Japanese invented something called the work circle, which I thought was fascinating. Instead of, say, Toyota putting 15 guys who are all experts on brakes in one room, and another 15 people that are experts on steering wheels, and another 15 people that are experts on carburetors, they built work circles where each person in that circle had an area of expertise. Because the idea was not to invent the best carburetor or the best transmission. Now, that is work that can be done in other areas. In the same way as Dizzy Gillespie, even though he is a great trumpet player and he had to practice and he had to learn his art, and there's no way around that, and a transmission specialist has to learn his art. Once he learns his art, what does he do with it? Well, the transmission relates to the steering, doesn't it? and relates to the engine. So in the same way as Dizzy Gillespie as a trumpet player had to relate to Charlie Parker as a saxophone player, a work circle means that a group of people who are well-versed in different areas of expertise begin to jam. It's a musical term which a lot of you know, which means to get together and improvise on a theme. The theme is we're going to design a car. All right, each person then steps up and in essence solos, improvises over their particular area of expertise with everybody else supporting him, steps back, and the next person. Now, that's how the jazz quintet works, and that's how problem solving works. I know it sounds a little crazy, but when you add the OODA loop to the idea of improvisation, you will find yourself in an interesting position in terms of problem solving. And then don't forget John Boyd. Don't forget taking the problem and not only breaking it down into its smallest pieces, but then synthesizing it into something else. That's kind of what happened with Apple computers and Facebook and a number of different groups and very successful companies that we look at now as paradigms of success because they've come up with an idea. Well, how did they come up with the idea? Well, Facebook, for instance, how do you think they came up with that idea? Anybody seen the movie? It's really kind of depressing, but it is a pretty good analogy to what actually happened. They didn't really do anything new. They broke the problem down into its pieces: computers, the internet, social networking, texting, a number of different things. They broke it down and then they reassembled it, synthesized it into something brand new called Facebook. And well, the rest is sort of history. So part of this is the jazz piece that Bill was talking about as an analytical piece. But there's another piece to this. And I'm going to grab my guitar here and I'm going to show you how music can be used as an analytical tool. And see if I can make sure this thing is working here. Yes. So what I'm going to do is take a song that is a Steely Dan song. It's called My Old School. We sold a few bazillion records, paid my rent for a while, and allowed me to buy a 1967 GTO, which probably wasn't great for the environment, but at least I got to have one for a little while. But the idea was a great song, and any great musician will tell you a great song is a great song no matter how you do it. So it seems like there's a corollary that a great idea is probably still a great idea, even though it's applied in a different way. For instance, there's this tune. It's, I remember the 35 sweet goodbyes when you put me on the Wolverine up to Annandale. It was still September when your daddy was quite surprised to find you with the working girls in the county jail. And on and on and on. It's a rock and roll song. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So what happens now? I'm in Nashville. Nashville is the home of country music. And I'm with a good friend of mine named Clint Black. And Clint says, you know that song, My Old School, that you all did? And I said, yeah, Clint, I love it. He says, you ever thought about doing it like country? I said, nope, never thought about it. So what? Let's try it. Well, I remember 35 sweet goodbyes when you put me on the Wolverine up to Annandale. It was just September when your daddy was quite surprised to find you with the working girls in the can jail. Hey, it's a country tune. Oh, no. Wait a minute. All right. So what would happen if we were at the Baked Potato, which is a little club in Los Angeles, and I would be hanging out with Brian Auger and a couple of different guys and say, hey, it's kind of a mellow night. Let's kind of lay it back, okay? It was just September when your daddy was quite surprised when he put me on the Wolverine up to Annandale. It was still September when your daddy was quite surprised to find you with the working girls in the county jail. Smoking with the boys upstairs. When I heard about the whole affair, I said, whoa, no, William and Mary won't do. Now, that's the same song, right? But after taking it apart, breaking it down into its, analyzing it in a sense, breaking it down into its smallest pieces, the chords, the melody, changing the tempos, the lyric, taking the things, the little pieces, and then resynthesizing them, we came up with three very distinct answers to the same problem. We applied three distinctive analytical processes to a theme, a problem, an idea, and came out with three totally different results. Now, another thing that Bill mentioned yesterday is how important jazz is and how it makes you feel. Well, why does it make you feel so good? Why does music make you feel so good? There are a million answers to that, but when I was working at Lawrence Livermore, which is a nuclear laboratory up near San Francisco, I was working there for years, we used to have these meetings where we would look at all the different programs that Lawrence Livermore had. And I got to tell you, man, it's the most eye-watering experience you can ever have. Femto laser peening at low neutron flux. Man, I'm telling you, after 2 days of this, you just want to slash your wrist or shoot yourself. So the director said, you know what? After 2 days of this, we're going to have somebody give a talk. Well, one of the guys that was on the laser advisory team with me, it was funny, the director said, I want two guys. I want a Grammy winner and I want a Nobel Prize winner, and I want to put them on the same team. So I guess I was the Grammy winner. And Charlie Towns, does anybody know who Charlie is? Charlie won the Nobel Prize for inventing the laser. Very, very interesting guy, very laid-back guy. He also wrote a book about the connection between theoretical physics and God. And he then got up and gave an hour presentation about the connection between theoretical physics and God. And I got to tell you, it changed my life. I'm not here to preach Christianity or religion. It's just made me realize, after breaking the problem down into what is reality, what are we made of, where do we come from, et cetera, into a set of finite pieces and resynthesizing him, he came up with the idea that the human spirit is as a set of coherent oscillations. Now, any of you who have taken any physics know that the glue that holds the universe together, for everything from subatomic particles to the planets, to solar systems, to stars, to galaxies, to galaxy clusters, has to do with vibration and frequency. That is the name of the game. So he said, I think the human spirit is this concept of coherent oscillations. And I said, Charlie, that's what music is. Coherent oscillations, this string vibrating with this string, and vibrating with this string, and this one, in a set of coherent oscillations. And he said, Skunk, you got it. That's the secret to the universe. Why does music touch us so deeply? It's because the molecules that are made up of the atoms, very simple, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, that make up our bodies are glued together by different frequencies. Now, you're going to say to me, well, that's a little weird. Well, let me help you understand it, because you, as a human being, are as a very sophisticated sensor package. Vibration starts from no vibration all the way down a linear path to pure energy. Einstein talked a little bit about that when he came up with the equation, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Well, how do you know that? Well, have you ever felt a rumble that you can't hear, but you feel it? So there's part of your body is telling you that there's a vibration. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. Next, it goes on to the part about 20 cycles per second up to about 20,000 cycles per second. Actually, about 17 for men, about 20,000 for women. That's why women like Michael McDonald and Frank Sinatra, because they don't have a lot of high frequencies in their voices. Just a little tidbit. So, and then it disappears. Then the only beings that can hear above 20,000 cycles are dogs. Their hearing is attuned slightly higher. But then even that goes away. So all of a sudden you're running down this linear progression and it stops. And then all of a sudden your skin starts to feel warm. Up. Now we're in the infrared. Heat. Now the vibrations are getting faster and faster and we feel the heat. And the vibrations get so fast that it turns to color. If I strike this string, that's A440, below middle C. That means that this string vibrates 440 times per second. Now, if I take the number 440, multiply it times 10 to the 23rd power times Planck's constant, which is a very spooky little number, you get the color green. Because what we're talking about is super harmonics, going higher and higher into the frequency spectrum. And as the pitch gets higher, it goes past where you can hear and then goes someplace else. After the visual, it goes into the ultraviolet, and then we start to get into gigahertz, radars, radio waves. Super harmonics, very simple. This is A440. What's this? A880. What's this? A1620. What we're doing is we're doubling the harmonics until finally we get to a point where we can't hear it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So what Charlie Towns is saying, that we are all coherent vibrations on a linear scale from 0 to light, or to pure energy, actually. And that's why music moves us, because the molecules of the atoms and the subatomic particles that make up our bodies are held together with vibration. Why do you think they call it the blues? Why do you think they call it the blues? Well, it's a pentatonic scale, for one thing. Now, when you play the notes in those scale, if you start to look at the super harmonics that the pentatonic scale creates, Dan, blue. What's going on here? Well, power of music. Let's see. Did anybody know what the devil's interval is? You could be burned at the stake for playing this thing. Now, I'll play this for a couple of seconds, and you tell me when you can't stand it anymore, okay? Had enough? Why have you had enough? Because there are no even harmonics anywhere generated in this two-note chord. Now, there's a guy named Johann Sebastian Bach that wrote something called Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which you've all heard a million times, you know. You've heard that in every vampire movie or Dracula movie you've ever seen. But when that piece of music was performed, he should have waited till the end of the church service, because they burned the church to the ground right afterwards. Scared the hell out of everybody. Why? Because he used the devil's interval. So Igor Stravinsky goes, oh yeah, love that. Wrote the Rite of Spring. Well, when they performed that, they looted 6 blocks of downtown Paris. Again, scared the hell out of everybody. So the power of music, the power of vibration, the power of frequency is what it is what music and how music touches us. Anyway, so I guess I'm going to end up with a couple of things. I do believe that a good song is a good idea. So instead of playing a melody, And then have the organ player or the piano player play it, and then the bass player and everybody else. Maybe we got a problem to solve. Maybe the problem is, how do we fix the environment? Which was two very good presentations, one made today, one made yesterday. Well, what was interesting is, in both presentations, the people that explained it to us broke the problem down into a series of very small pieces that we could understand. And even the gentleman that made the presentation on economics, in a very humorous way, gave us the data, in other words, the pieces of the problem. Now the question is, as been suggested by the people who spoke today and yesterday, now that you know, now that we've analyzed it, now it's time for the synthesis part. Now, the synthesis part is affected by a number of things. It's affected by a person's knowledge. If you're not an economist, you probably won't be able to contribute as much to the economic side of the argument as an economist, except for the fact that if you're someone who is not in the game, you may come to it with a totally different point of view. You may, instead of a whole room full of piano players, you may say, I'm a guitar player. I got a whole other way to interpret this. So what we've been given today is a set of analytical pieces and been asked to solve that problem. So that's how music, problem solving, analysis, and synthesis all work together. Now, the gentleman, made some comments about the United States, and there's no doubt about we are one screwed up country. I'm sure we're not the only one, but it is. I live there, and I live in Los Angeles, and it doesn't get more screwed up than LA, believe me. But there is a little bit of hope. Everybody is familiar with the mythology of Pandora's box. When she opened up the box, all this bad stuff came out. But what was left in the bottom of the box was hope. So Winston Churchill, I think, put it best when he said, you can always count on the United States to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. Okay, well, but you know what? I think he said it not with malice, but he said it because he truly cared about the innovative piece and really believed that there was something about this. Now, how do we solve social problems? Well, I'll tell you a quick story. When the Doobie Brothers went to Moscow to play in an outdoor concert, and this was not Russia, this was the Soviet Union, I noticed something very interesting. First of all, our records were illegal. You could go to jail for listening to any of our records. But every single person in the audience of 40,000 people knew every word to every song. So I guess that means that if you want something bad enough, and you're interested in something bad enough, you'll find out a way to learn about it, even if they're going to put you in jail. And again, I had a conversation with Sylvia today. We were talking a little bit about problem solving, ways to go about doing things, and how we can influence people. Well, one way to influence people is by beating them over the head. That's called war, and that is a very, very, very bad way to do it. As a matter of fact, if you've gotten that far, you pretty much lost the plot. The other way to do it is offer them something that's interesting. Is anybody familiar with Joseph Nye, former Undersecretary of State? He wrote a book called Soft Power. He said the reason that the United States defeated the Soviet Union wasn't because we had bigger missiles or anything like that. It was French fries, Elvis Presley, and blue jeans. Now, what does that mean? Well, those kids in that audience did whatever it is that they needed to do to connect with us, even though it was illegal, even though it was against the law. But we didn't go out there with M16s and guns and fighter planes. We went out with electric guitars. And it was incredible going to clubs that night and sitting down with other musicians who I don't speak any Russian, and they didn't speak any English, but as soon as we grabbed our instruments, it was amazing how we started solving problems. The first problem was communication. Well, A440 is A440 in anybody's language. The blues is the blues, no matter if you're Japanese or Indonesian. And Steely Dan is Steely Dan. So we were solving problems. The first problem was communicating. That was easy. The next problem was, how do we get their information, their desires, their creativity out of this closed society and into another place? Well, so I pulled out a little tape recorder, which, by the way, was illegal. You have to register things. Put it on a stool, and we all jammed. And then I took it back to the United States, and I went to a radio show in Los Angeles, and I played it on the radio. Wait a minute. These guys were illegal. They can't play this stuff. It's against the law, damn it. We're going to put you in jail. Except we just played it on the radio 5,000 miles away. So we solved that problem. So I guess what I'm trying to do is give you examples of how this is a problem-solving medium. The whole concept of the arts. The arts is all about ethos. If you're happy, truly happy, you're probably not going to do great art. I mean, if you ever listen to 17th century chamber music, it sucks. It's awful. Same rules over and over again. It's crap. You can't stand this stuff for more than 5 minutes because it's just legal. It's exactly the way it's supposed to do. Stravinsky and Bach fixed that right away, right? They said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So there's something about the ethos, and it's anger or frustration or fear. And fear is the one thing that stops all of us from doing anything. If somebody can scare the hell out of you, they can keep you from doing something. How many people here have read Machiavelli's The Prince? The text on how to control people. And it starts with fear. As soon as you eliminate fear, you can start doing something. Now, some of these kids in that club that we were playing in Russia had read stories about the United States. We were big, bad guys. We were coming in and going to kick their butts. They were scared until we started playing. Changed all that right away. As soon as you get rid of the fear, then you can start. It's like creating the perfect agar-agar in a Petri dish to grow something. You can't grow anything if fear is present. So, other than that, that's pretty much it. I don't have anything to say other than there's some innovative things. Everybody used to play records, right? I remember my daughter's friend came over to my house one time and picked up a record. She said, "What? You can play both sides of this?" You know, it's like, yeah, okay. Now, we thought turntables were for playing records, right? You ever been to a rap concert? They're using turntables as musical instruments. There is no limit to what you can do with your imagination. All it takes is no fear, the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act, analysis to break the problem down into its smallest pieces, synthesis to create something different from those pieces, and then you're on the road. And I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it, but it is one proven method. And somebody asked me, I think you asked me about, the people in the U.S. government actually listen to this stuff? They actually do. And in other governments as well, because people are beginning to realize that the old way of doing things, as the gentleman explained to you before, don't cut it anymore. It is not going to work. So it's time for some creative thinking. It's time for rock and roll stars to figure out ways to do military tactics. As a matter of fact, does anybody know who Dan Aykroyd is?
Yeah. Danny's
an old friend of mine. And we put together a group of people that were in the military the idea was if you put a very smart group of people in a particular situation and made them good analysts, they could help you no matter where they were. They would be able to, they'd have the skills. But I had to come up with a role-playing syllabus to teach these guys, Special Forces guys. So who are you going to call? Who's the best role player I know? Calling on the phone, Danny, I got a job for you. I want you to come to the Pentagon. Why did I call Dan? Well, I don't know if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live, the TV show. But before Saturday Night Live, there was a TV show called Second City. And it was like Saturday Night Live, but it was all Canadian actors. They were doing the show out of Chicago. Now, that show and Saturday Night Live came from a Canadian government program designed to teach inner city kids role-playing so they wouldn't be afraid of the police or the firemen or doctors or anybody else. That morphed into Saturday Night Live into Ghostbusters. Okay, so why did I call? Who are you going to call? Danny. And who better to teach a course at role-playing? Because who better knows about that than the guy who helped create the inner city program for kids? So again, maybe the expertise that you're looking for isn't right in front of your face. Maybe it's an area or someone that you never think of. Talk to your kids. You talk about some weird stuff. I have a daughter and a son, and whenever I talk to them, they're from another planet, which is great because they don't look at problems the way I do. And that is probably more important in some ways as expertise. As a matter of fact, in Hollywood, what they do is an exercise. When screenwriters get together, they write a movie that is absolutely pure crap. They sit down and they write a movie about a teapot that turns into a gorilla that then steals a sports car and becomes president of the United States. And what? But the idea is, if you start down this road, you will start to get ideas. And even though nobody in their right mind would ever make a movie like that, what it does is it stimulates thinking. And that's what our kids do. And our kids do other interesting things, like invent Apple computers and Facebook and eBay and other things like that. So I would just urge you to talk to your children. I'm not saying you don't, but I would urge you to talk to your children and find ways to be creative, whether it's making music, whether it's playing games, whatever it might be. My 5-year-old grandson plays Nintendo with his 94-year-old great-grandmother. Well, they don't really have a lot in common, except they do now. So I'm just saying that the old ways of doing things are not going to help us anymore. That's not to say that expertise and intelligence and capability and the past doesn't have something to teach us. But folks, it's the day that you stop moving, as the gentleman said, you've already lost the game. Anyway, I'd like to take some questions, and I'm ready to get hammered. I have no fear whatsoever. If we can do that.
Before questions, just let's thank Jeff Baxter. Really great.
Thanks, buddy.
We're a little pressed for time now, so if you've got a quick one anywhere, one here.
Yes, sir.
My name is Munir. I come from Jordan, and I am blessed to be here. My question is, can you start a school for teaching innovation, or do you have to look for innovative people and teach them how to use their innovation?
Okay, the question is, can you actually start a school to teach innovation, or do you have to work with innovative people to start with?
Right, chicken and egg, right, I guess.
No more chickens, sorry, no more chickens.
No more. I think the answer is yes. No, okay, right. No, the idea is that if you tell people that there is that you're doing something creative people will show up. And also, if you talk to creative people, they might come up with the idea of creating a school as well, or an institution of some kind. So it's not really one or the other. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, I think you need both. So that's...
Okay, that's great.
You get born with innovation, like an artist. You cannot find anybody and to say, come, I want to teach you or to make you an innovative person.
Yeah, but you're an artist. What are you talking to me for? You came up with the idea. You asked me how to do it. You've already thought about ways to do it. So you've already talked to me. You came here. You talked to him. You're already going down that road. I'm serious. I'm not trying to be disingenuous. You have already started down the creative road, and you don't think you're an artist. That's not true. Just something tweaked you, and you said, I'm going to start working on this problem. I'm serious. And the more people you talk to about that, you will find people that will come to you and say, not only do I like that idea, but I want to help out. They'll gravitate to you because you analyzed the problem, broke it down into its simple things. I need a school, I need some help, and then people will come to you. Happens all the time. That's how bands were formed. They did the Beatles, it worked out. You know. All right, boss.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Baxter. Thank you, Jeff.